grandmother of 3 girls. So good afternoon, everyone. I think this is probably the most difficult session. At the end of the conference, after a nice lunch, their mind is already thinking about going back and all the things they left behind, you know, back at home or back at work. But I will try my best to keep your attention. This conference we're talking about Europe, but actually I am not only thinking about Europe, because I think the issues are the same if we're talking about the whole world, and if we're talking about our families too. Some of the ways that we can go about dealing with some of the problems or identifying some of the problems, and how we can respond to some of those needs too. So I chose the title Towards an Era of Participation, Family Culture as a Paradigm and Tool for Prevention and Cure. Maybe even I say quickly, I go back to that, our Women's Federation logo, which doesn't look very good up on that particular screen, but for me it's inspiring because if you notice, and you can't even see it here, but the lady in the middle, I see her as like standing at a podium, like this, and looking out at an audience like this, but could be much bigger or smaller, somehow being able to address the people that she is, you know, in front of with dignity and esteem, but also humility. And I think that is one aspect of our role as women and leaders in this world. I'm speaking now to women, but I hope men are listening. That we have to be able to cultivate that capacity in ourselves, actually. Because even over lunch we had this discussion with a group of women that I know. Sometimes it's not so easy for us to go out into that public sphere after spending a long time raising children, taking care of our family, kind of getting comfortable in that environment. And how can we really make that step? Because in fact, in my experience in 20 years at the UN, not being paid by the UN unfortunately, but at least trying to influence at the United Nations, how can we be able to bring those talents and experiences and vision and wisdom and all these things that we have been cultivating in our lives, even as young women already, many of these things are being developed as sisters, as older sisters and daughters. How can we really be able to make that step, to really bring these capacities to the public realm and really be effective in bringing change? Because I think that is exactly what this world is needing in this time. And so I wanted to just start quickly then by saying, founded in 1992, which was about 20 years ago, the Women's Federation for World Peace was given the motto, a very simple, almost you could say simplistic, but if you really meditate on it for a while, it's not so simple. Humankind is one family sharing one home, the earth. So in that, you know, the environment, all different aspects actually need to be taken care of. And very recently, a speech that was given in Korea just a few months ago, the founder of Women's Federation for World Peace, Dr. Hak Jahan Moon, actually interestingly read by her husband at that time, Dr. Sun Myung Moon. One quote from that speech was, "The goal of Women's Federation was never to remain just another women's organization. Its goal was a global peace movement of a new kind that had at its heart the substantial realization of a culture of peace." So that, I think, really we have to keep in mind, and we're trying to keep that in mind. this, just to say at the beginning, Women's Federation in 1992, there were a group of 1,600 women who were sent out to 160 nations in the world. I think many in this audience actually know that already. But with the idea, not because of their great talents, I mean their great professional experience, but because of their deep desire to actually work and to help and to support women. These women were sent out in groups of 10 to these different countries with the sole idea to support, as volunteers, the needs and the work of the women there, so that they could be more engaged in building better communities and building better families, in influencing their governments as high as they could go. So anyway, I won't go through, I don't have time to go through all these different programs, but you can imagine that in 160 different countries, with so many different women working together, the creativity level was very high, and many, many, many things developed out of that, and still are. So some of the issues we've been discussing these days concerning Europe, and which I'm discussing often at the United Nations in Geneva, like human rights. So these are ideas that make some people cringe, make other people excited. I sit through the Human Rights Council periodically, and it can be very frustrating at times to see human rights used as such kind of it's like a demand. I demand my righs. I defend my rights against your rights. But this is not the intention, and this was never the founding intention of the United Nations, that the human rights should be used in that way. Human rights, if I understand I have rights, that implies someone else has rights, and I have to be more cognizant of that in my behavior. And if we want to learn human rights, we have to teach it to our children from an early age. I have a book that I use with my children when I talk about the UN and human rights, trying to help them understand what I do. And in it is a picture of like a family sitting around, it's a cartoon, but a family sitting around a table, full of food, a happy family, 10 children or something, parents, full table. And then the next page, it says on that page, some people have enough food or something like that. The next page, you turn the page and it says, empty table, very sad-looking children sitting there. And in fact, one corner, one little boy sitting holding a bowl, begging for food. So what is the natural thought of the child who sees that? They understand that human rights means some people don't have what they need. I have enough for myself, but some people don't. So my natural desire as a child, pure in heart, is that, or maybe even when I grow up, I want to be the kind of person who wants to see that those people don't have the food that they need. So this is the natural way to cultivate human rights. So Eleanor Roosevelt had a very, Eleanor Roosevelt had a very simple kind of quote that I often refer to: where after all do human rights begin? In small places close to home. Without concerted citizen action to uphold them close to home, even in the home, we shall look in vain for progress in the larger world. But the question I ask myself now is, even if each of these articles of the Human Rights, Universal Declaration of Human Rights is fulfilled, people have enough food, people have schools to go to, they have a home, they have water, they have all these different points, would we actually be living in a culture of peace, the kind of place where we would really feel prosperity on every level? And I think not, because there is, we can make conventions, and we can make sure each family has food. We can kind of solve all those kind of substance-related issues, but actually, where can we really cultivate the heart of people to really want to sustain that by sharing and by living together? And I think this comes, and I'll talk about that in a minute. There is one article of the Universal Declaration that gives me great inspiration, and that is Article 21, which states that everyone is entitled to contribute to the betterment of society. But beyond that, it is even essential to do so for the dignity and free development of my personality. And I think for Women's Federation, I think this is really I take that as kind of our motto, that really we should think like that. We have to really think like that. As women, as young women, we have really not only a responsibility to go out, but it is actually to our great benefit to figure out how we can do that. And forming women's organizations, getting involved in our communities, all these things help us step by step to be able to discover that. Maybe I did want to bring in a few points about some of our programs, because in Europe we have many, many different activities going on. Monthly we have in every country, not every country, but many countries in Europe, we have local activities kind of geared to what is needed locally for the women working in their communities there. In the case of Europe, we have many projects where we are like fundraising and doing things and trying to work in Africa and send money to Southeast Asia and things like that, because we live in a place where we do have, enough to be able to do that. And but one project that I've been very active in for the past 16 years is our Women's Federation Middle East Peace Conference. Now, we know, of course, even right now in the news, there's every time my husband and I, we go back to our room and we turn on the news because we wonder what's happening, in Palestine, and is Israel really going to go in there and with their troops? But I think that is one aspect of the war that is going on and the conflict that needs to be solved. There is another aspect of really the day-to-day, person-to-person kind of relationships that need to be solved. The reconciliation that really needs to happen between people so that it's not so easy for things to flare up like that and escalate so quickly. So Women's Federation works a lot in the area of reconciliation. And one of these areas is through our Middle Eastern Peace Conferences, which is that we had this year, we had it in Geneva at the UN. We have it, sometimes we have it in the Middle East, sometimes we have it at the UN in Geneva. This year we chose as a title, Children Affected by Conflict and Disaster, Prevention, Protection, Healing, and Empowerment. So that is that is the Women's Federation. We feel this is kind of our niche. And to our great pride and what we really hope for, you can see in this one picture here, that is a very famous UNICEF spokesman, the white-haired man sitting next to me. The one on the right of me is the head of the UNRWA. That is the UN body on the ground in Palestine, the Relief and Works body there. And we had representatives of young women who had been involved in Syria, or who had been involved at the time of the kind of this initial Arab Spring, as some call it. And we could hear, it was really quite amazing. We had also the president of the Human Rights Council who came, who left the council, which was happening in another room, and came to really listen to what we were saying, because we could bring these people from the Middle East. We brought about 50 women from the Middle East to this session, and we combined kind of the experts, UNICEF, UNRWA, UNDP, we had someone from UNESCO, and then we brought in the NGOs and the women from the Middle East who are really working on these issues there. And for instance, the Human Rights Council president was so excited about this, actually. She is still to this day keeping in touch with some of these young women and receiving reports about what is happening in Syria. At the time there were things, Libya was the big thing at the time that this happened. But, so we have the capacity through this kind of just local work that we started out doing to actually be able to reach these quite higher and higher levels. And we discovered that even at these higher levels, people are very much influenceable. And people are also good people are looking for solutions. Sometimes the UN is too much caught up in their discussion which is completely out of the realm of possibility of what is really happening. So we, as women working locally, if we take responsibility to bring what we're doing to the UN, we can really help very much the UN or our governments to do our work. And in fact, they cannot do it without us. So I'm never going to make it through all my slides at this point, I can see. Okay, just to say, we had at the conference the year before, it was called Women in War and Reconstruction. So this year we focused on children, last year about women, how women worked to really bring some of the changes. And actually what we discovered was that even though initially they were very much involved and their involvement was accepted, actually when things calmed down, many times they were sort of pushed back into their corner. So we were trying to help with that. But we had 6 different UN agencies participated in this. And this year also we had more than that. We had maybe 12 governments and maybe 7 different UN agencies who were involved in these meetings. I want to switch maybe now just quickly to some of the projects we're doing in Europe. You know, one big thing we're trying to do under this banner of we as women working locally, but trying to influence change on the higher level, you know, step by step. We commemorate some of the UN days. And actually this year especially, it's become very, I would say, very popular within Women's Federation that we do that. You know, International Women's Day or International Day of Peace, Human Rights Day. There are, I think I calculated 58 different UN days in 1 year. So whatever your interest might be, environment, or you know, you can find something to hold on to maybe go to your local community. In our case, and in this case in Albania, they actually went to the local government, the city of Tirana, and they finally made an event in conjunction with the city, the government officials, because even sometimes government officials don't know so much about the UN days. We can help them actually, and even the local work, even the municipal level work can become for them more of a global level work. So we don't need a great expertise to do that. We can just start working. Yeah? Besides human rights, of course, we talked a lot about governments or about leadership. Of course, it is my firm belief that women have to be involved in leadership and in decision-making. But we can, not just because we are women, we also have to make ourselves needed. We have to also, we need some capacity building, we need experience, but we cannot be afraid of taking the steps to make ourselves more kind of expert. Women maybe often think, well, I'm not expert. And I thought that too when I started working at the UN 20 years ago. I do think I'm an expert now, but it's not necessarily because anyone has given me a doctorate or, you know, but just because I'm engaged and I feel I have some expertise to bring in. And I wanted to just read one more quote from this same speech that I mentioned before, and this was this founding speech in the summer this year. One of the last speeches that was actually given by Father Moon, Dr. Sundar Moon, the husband of our founder. In fact, Dr. and Mrs. Moon are co-founders of Women's Federation. And in the speech it was said, in the 21st century, women should play a major role in world history by serving, together with men, as one of the wheels of the engine pulling forward the construction of a peaceful world. Going beyond a century of power and technology, women must engage to become the central axis in building a century characterized by its loving, peaceful culture. And their role will be more important than ever before. But this is not automatic. Of course, if we don't make ourselves available for that, if we aren't alert to where we could get involved, if we aren't challenging ourselves sort of courageously to think, well, my intuition tells me that's not okay, what's happening in my community. Small projects like in the local kiosk, you have all the pornography magazines at the level where the little children come in to buy their chewing gum. You can go and you can make some, or you can try just by telling them, you know, yourself. If it doesn't work, you gather together a group of women, men, young people, whatever, and you'd be surprised how much can be done with a little bit of extra effort just by following that good intuition that you have. Okay, I said that already. Yeah, I think a good part, it was said again yesterday many times, there has to be trust between government and the people. It can't just be laws forcing us to do what we should do. We have to, and you can't have trust if you don't have engagement. So we have to make ourselves available. We have to attend meetings, we have to look for ways. You know, even if we don't feel confident, we have to force ourselves, maybe in small groups, to get more involved. These are some of the things Women's Federation has done. We made events at the UN Commission on the Status of Women. I was asked to be the chair of a special session on human rights, also to my great astonishment. Actually, I didn't feel so qualified, but so I did it, and in fact, many good results came out of that. Because there are topics like improving education for women and girls in science and technology. So there are topics that are coming up where we have something that we can say. We have projects going on in other countries and other continents. We found speakers to come in and who spoke just alongside of the UN speakers. And we could bring in some of our ways of working in order to help the United Nations to do a better job. This is something that happened regularly at the UN, either in Geneva or New York. So just, what is my, I think my time must be almost up actually, yeah? Are you, Christian, do you know?
I didn't keep track.
Well, that's a good sign, I guess.
5 more minutes.
5 minutes, seriously, or you're extending generously?
No.
Okay. So the point I wanted to, a couple of more points I wanted to make was, of course, women, we can be victims. We are victims. And as I mentioned yesterday, some maybe understood and some didn't understand. Men are also victims. And that we have responsibility to each other, not to too much claim our own victimhood, or even to allow the other to, force victimhood on us in a sense. We only remain in that level of as victim as long as we are not asserting ourselves to come out. And I think that's what we have to do. That's really, because also nobody likes to listen to somebody talking about victimhood all the time, And so I think somehow it's really a mutual responsibility we have, men and women, to really pull ourselves up. There are, of course, conventions and all kind of resolutions at the UN that help us, that we can make ourselves we can make it available to us to really investigate a little bit, and we find conventions that say exactly what I'm already thinking, actually. So we can use this to help ourselves to come, to influence further and wider, but also it gives us more self-esteem and more confidence when we understand, of course I'm not just a victim. I don't just want to be a victim. I want to take responsibility. I want to bring my best talents into the world to solve things, and I want that for my children and grandchildren. So, so maybe for me this is a big point, is advocacy. I know it's a word I used to hate, but I love it now because I feel that we have to, somehow we have to become people who feel confident to persuade. Not in a way that people can't take, but in a good way, to try to persuade things, encourage things, persuade things to happen, to bring change in a constructive way. We can't just let good ideas come into our head and then let them go back out again. We have to act on them. So, family. In my mind, and of course the founders of Women's Federation, UPF also, we talk a lot about family because we see it as really a tool, we see it as a paradigm, we see it as something that we're all involved in, and in the same way that women have often being looked at as being victims if we want to be taken care of. Same thing for family. Family is rarely talked about at the UN. Even in to my great shock, this Millennium Development Goals midway document, kind of assessment of where we're at with the MDGs, there was not one mention of family in the whole document. So I think we really have, and this is something that just by speaking about it, talking to the government about it, talking at the UN, bringing it up here and there, this can change. People are really influenceable. If I look at things like landmines, in fact, even if I look at things like smoking, if we think some years ago, smoking, people smoked on airplanes, people smoked out. Now you can't even smoke outside in the fresh air, actually. It's incredible how things can be, and this is because of advocacy, lobbying, determination, you know, looking at what is right and trying to make things go in that direction. Maybe I would just end on this one point, because it's kind of something that after thinking a lot about family and hearing a lot about patriarchy, matriarchy, it kind of being used as a sort of a way of justifying the failure of things, and then I started thinking, well, family, but there's no word like that to fit into that context, that paradigm. So I thought the idea of familiarchy. And so this was sort of a construct of mine, actually even created the phonetic part. It's not really from a dictionary yet, but I thought it's a good way maybe for us to kind of present our idea of a system that could really work and that we could strive towards. So the definition I created was, it's a system of society in which the family unit is the nexus. Parents, children, and extended family members cooperate according to their roles to maintain and enhance other members and to contribute as a whole and as individual members to the development of a larger community, becoming an intertwined network of families. In the same way, we can expand this to government, the relationship between family and government. So I think it needs some work, but I think it's an idea that kind of makes sense to me. We have lots of, okay, I'll skip that one maybe. You know, we have lots of problems, gender. We heard yesterday in the women's session. There are lots of problems with these relationships between men and women, which I absolutely believe if we work on that in families with our young children, where young children can see relationship of father and mother working well, father and mother loving each other, supporting each other, helping each other, and then we don't have these kind of extreme problems which we see in some communities, really exaggerated way, like honor crimes and all these things that maybe some of us can't hardly relate to. But this is just a picture of my eldest son, his wife, and they're the first of the 2 babies they have. And I see the way this little girl, who's now 3 years old, how she relates to her father and mother, and the freedom with which she loves cars like her father does, or she loves the things the mother shows her, you know, reading little books in Japanese to her. And I feel that this is really the point in the moment, and this is like the missing link, sort of, in the work that is being done. In many, I mean, I know I'm already preaching to the converted here, but maybe my point is that we have to understand that it might seem like, of course, to us, but it's not of course to everyone. So we have to really take these ideas and really see how we can, you know, we can bring those in and plant little seeds wherever, locally, in our communities. And then we'll see that a year later, someone will be talking about what you said, claiming responsibility for it, but we don't care, because anyway, the idea got across, right? Okay, anyway, I think that's my sign to stop. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Caroline. You gave us quite some good food for thought, I think, and some very valuable points you mentioned. I like the coining of familiarchy instead of patriarchy or matriarchy, the familiarchy. If you could introduce this to the United Nations, that would be great. Really. And this is very hopeful for our future. Also, getting out of the victim role is a good thing, I think, for many groups, for many people. We have been victimized in one or the other way, everybody of us, but to get out of this role and take more ownership and proactive role, this is the way to overcome the role of the victim. And also I want to mention one point. you mentioned sending out the 1,600 Japanese sisters from the Women's Federation for World Peace. And at that time I was in the Middle East, in a country in the Middle East, and I could receive 10 of those sisters.